and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert Heinlein. We left Kip and Peewee escaping from the bad guys on the moon. So that means they're now hiking across the moon. It was about 10 miles to the mountains. We made short work of it. You can make time on the moon if it is flat and if you can keep your balance. Pee-wee kept stepping it up until we were almost flying, long, low strides that covered ground like an ostrich. And you know, it's easier fast than slow. The only hazard after I got the hang of it was landing on a rock or hole or something and tripping. But that was hazard enough because I couldn't pick my footing at that speed. I wasn't afraid of falling. I felt certain that Oscar could take the punishment. But suppose I landed on my back, probably smashed the mother thing to jelly. I was worried about Pee-wee, too. That cut-rate tourist suit wasn't as rugged as Oscar. I've read about explosive decompression. I never want to see it, especially not a little girl. But I didn't dare use radio to warn her, even though we were probably shielded from Wormface, and if I tugged on my leash, I might make her fall. The plane started to rise, and Pee-wee let it slow us down. Presently, we were walking, then we were climbing a scree slope. I stumbled, but landed on my hands and got up. 1/6 gravity has advantages as well as hazards. We reached the top, and Pee-wee led us into a pocket in the rocks. She stopped and touched helmets. Anybody home? You two all right? All right, dear. Sure, I agreed. A little winded, maybe. That was an understatement, but if Pee-wee could take it, I could. We can rest, she answered, and take it easy from here on. I wanted to get us out of the open as fast as possible. They'll never find us here. I thought she was right. A worm-faced ship flying over might spot us if they could see down as well as up, probably just a matter of touching a control. But our chances were better now. This is the time to recharge your empty bottle. Okay. None too soon. The bottle, which had been almost full, had dropped by a third, more like half. She couldn't make it to Tombaugh Station on that, simple arithmetic. So I crossed my fingers and got to work. Partner, will you untie this cat's cradle? While Pee-wee fumbled at knots, I started to take a drink, then stopped, ashamed of myself. Pee-wee must be chewing her tongue to work up saliva by now, and I hadn't been able to think of any way to get water to her. The tank was inside my helmet, and there was no way to reach it without making me and Mother Thing dead in the process. If I ever lived to be an engineer, I'd correct that. I decided that it was idiotic not to drink because she couldn't. The lives of us all might depend on my staying in the best condition I could manage. So I drank and ate 3 malted milk tablets and a salt tablet, then had another drink. It helped a lot, but I hoped Pee-wee hadn't noticed. She was busy unwinding clothesline. Anyhow, it was hard to see into a helmet. I took Pee-wee's empty bottle off her back, making darn sure to close her outside stop valve first. There's supposed to be a one-way valve where the air hose enters a helmet, but I no longer trusted her suit. It might have more cost-saving shortcomings. I laid the empty on the ground by a full one, looked up, straightened up, and touched helmets. Pee-wee, disconnect the bottle on the left side of my back. Why, Kip? Who's doing this job? I had a reason, but was afraid she might argue. My left-hand bottle held pure oxygen. The others were oxyhelium. It was full except for a few minutes of fiddling last night in Centerville. Since I couldn't possibly give her bottle a full charge, the next best thing was to give her a half charge of straight oxygen. She shut up and removed it. I set about trying to transfer pressure between bottles whose connections didn't match. There was no way to do it properly, short of tools 250,000 miles away, or over in Tombaugh Station, which was just as bad. But I did have adhesive tape. Oscar's manual called for 2 first aid kits. I didn't know what was supposed to be in them. The manual had simply given USAF stock numbers. I hadn't been able to guess what would be useful in an outside kit. A hypodermic needle, maybe, sharp enough to stab through and give a man morphine when he needed it terribly. But since I didn't know, I had stocked inside and outside with bandage, dressings, and a spool of surgical tape. I was betting on the tape. I butted the mismatched hose connections together, tore off a scrap of bandage, and wrapped it around the junction. I didn't want sticky stuff on the joint. It could foul the operation on a suit. Then I taped the junction, wrapping tightly, working very painstakingly, and taping 3 inches on each side as well as around the joint. If tape could restrain that pressure a few moments, there would still be one deuce of a force trying to drag that joint apart. I didn't want it to pull apart at the first jolt. I used the entire roll. I motioned Peewee to touch helmets. I'm about to open the full bottle. The valve on the empty is already open. When you see me start to close the valve on the full one, you close the other one. Fast. Got it? Close the valve when you do. Quickly. Roger. Stand by. Get your hand on the valve. I grabbed that lump of bandaged joint in one fist, squeezed as hard as I could, and put my other hand on the valve. If that joint let go, maybe my hand would go with it. But if the stunt failed, little Peewee didn't have long to live. So I really gripped. Watching both gauges, I barely cracked the valve. The hose quivered, the needle gauge that read empty twitched. I opened the valve wide. One needle swung left, the other right. Quickly, they approached half charge. Now, I yelled uselessly and started closing the valve, and felt that patchwork joint start to give. The hoses squeezed out of my fist, but we lost only a fraction of gas. I found that I was trying to close a valve that was already closed tight. Peewee had hers closed. The gauges each showed just short of half full. There was air for Peewee. I sighed and found I had been holding my breath. Peewee put her helmet against mine and said very soberly, "Thanks, Kip." "Chart and drug service, ma'am. No tip necessary. Let me tidy this mess. You can tie me and we'll go." "You won't have to carry but one extra bottle now." "Wrong, Peewee. We may do this stunt 5 or 6 times until there's only a whisper left, or until the tape wears out," I added to myself. The first thing I did was to rewrap the tape on its spool. And if you think that is easy, wearing gloves and with the adhesive drying out as fast as you wind it, try it. In spite of the bandage, sticky stuff had smeared the connections with when the hose parted, but it dried so hard that it chipped off the bayonet and snap joint easily. I didn't worry about the screw thread joint. I didn't expect to use it on a suit. We mounted Pee-wee's recharge bottle, and I warned her that it was straight oxygen. "Cut your pressure and feed from both bottles. What's your blood color reading?" "I've been carrying it low on purpose." "Idiot, you want to keel over? Kick your chin valve. Get into normal range." We mounted one bottle I had swiped on my back, tied the other and the oxy bottle on my front, and were on our way. Earth mountains are predictable. Lunar mountains aren't. They've never been shaped by water. We came to a hole too steep to go down other than by rope, and a wall beyond I wasn't sure we could climb. With pitons and snap rings and no spacesuits, it wouldn't have been hard in the Rockies, but not the way we were. Pee-wee reluctantly led us back. The scree slope was worse going down. I backed down on hands and knees, with Pee-wee belaying the line above me. I wanted to be a hero and belay for her. We had a brisk argument. "Oh, quit being big and male and gallantly stupid, Kip. You've got 4 big bottles and the mother thing, and you're top heavy, and I climb like a goat." I shut up. At the bottom, she touched helmets. "Kip," she said worriedly, "I don't know what to do." "What's the trouble?" "I kept a little south of where the crawler came through. I wanted to avoid crossing right where the crawler crossed. I'm beginning to think there isn't any other way." "I wish you'd told me before." "But I didn't want them to find us. The way the crawler came is the first place they'd look." Yes." I looked up at the range that blocked us. In pictures, the mountains of the moon look high and sharp and rugged. Framed by the lens of a spacesuit, they look simply impossible. I touched helmets again. "We might find another way if we had time and air and the resources of a major expedition, but we've got to take the route the crawler did." "Which way?" "A little way north, I think." We tried to work north along the foothills, but it was slow and difficult. Finally, we backed off the edge of the plain. It made us jumpy, but it was a chance we had to take. We walked, briskly but not running, for we didn't dare miss the crawler's tracks. I counted paces, and when I reached 1,000, I tugged the line. Pee-wee stopped and we touched helmets. We've come half a mile. How much further do you think it is? Or could it possibly be behind us? Pee-wee looked up at the mountains. I don't know, she admitted. Everything looks different. We're lost? Uh, it ought to be ahead somewhere, but we've come pretty far. Do you want to turn around? Pee-wee, I don't even know the way to the post office. But what should we do? I think we ought to keep going until you are absolutely certain the pass can't be any farther. You watch for the pass and I'll watch for crawler tracks. Then, when you're certain that we've come too far, we'll turn back. We can't afford to make short casts like a dog trying to pick up a rabbit's scent. All right. I'd counted 2,000 more paces, another mile, when Pee-wee stopped. Kip, it can't be ahead of us. The mountains are higher and solider than ever. You're sure? Think hard. Better to go another 5 miles than to stop too short. She hesitated. She had her face pushed up close to her lens while we touched helmets, and I could see her frown. Finally, she said, It's not up ahead, Kip. That settles it. To the rear march. Lay on, Macduff, and cursed be him who first cries hold enough. King Lear, Macbeth, want to bet? Those tracks were only a half mile behind us. I had missed them. They were on bare rock with only the lightest covering of dust. The sun had been over my shoulder when we first crossed them, and the caterpillar tread marks hardly showed. I almost missed them going back. They led off the plain and straight up into the mountains. We couldn't possibly have crossed those mountains without following the crawler's trail. Pee-wee had had the optimism of a child. It wasn't a road, it was just something the crawler on caterpillar treads could travel. We saw places that even a crawler hadn't been able to go until whoever pioneered it set a whopping big blast, backed off, and waited for a chunk of mountain to get out of the way. I doubt if Skinny and Fatty carved that goat's path. They didn't look fond of hard work. Probably one of the exploration parties. If Pee-wee and I had attempted to break a new trail, we'd be there yet, relics for tourists of future generations. But where a tread vehicle can go, a man can climb. It was no picnic. It was trudge, 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 up and up and up, watch for loose rock and mind where you put your feet. Sometimes we belayed with the line. Nevertheless, it was mostly just tedious. When Pee-wee had used that half charge of oxygen, we stopped and I equalized pressure again, this time being able to give her only a quarter charge, like Achilles and the tortoise. I could go on indefinitely giving her half of what was left, if the tape held out. It was in bad shape, but the pressure was only half as great, and I managed to keep the hoses together until we closed valves. I should say that I had it fairly easily. I had water, food, pills, dexedrine. The last was an enormous help. Anytime I felt fagged, I borrowed energy with a pep pill. Poor Pee-wee had nothing but air and courage. She didn't even have the cooling I had. Since she was on a richer mix, one bottle being pure oxygen, it did not take as much flow to keep up her blood color index, and I warned her not to use a bit more than necessary. She could not afford air for cooling. She had to save it to breathe. I know, Kip, she answered pettishly. I've got the needle jiggling the red right now. Think I'm a fool? I just want to keep you alive. All right, but quit treating me as a child. You put one foot in front of the other. I'll make it. Sure you will. As for the mother thing, she always said she was all right, and she was breathing the air I had, a trifle used, but I didn't know what was hardship to her. Hanging by his heels all day would kill a man. To a bat, it's a nice rest. Yet bats are our cousins. I talked with her as we climbed. It didn't matter what. Her songs had the effect on me that it has to have your own gang cheering. Poor Pee-wee didn't even have that comfort, except when we stopped and touched helmets. We still weren't using radio. Even in the mountains, we were fearful of attracting attention. We stopped again, and I gave Pee-wee 1/8 the charge. The tape was in very poor shape afterward. I doubted it would serve again. I said, Pee-wee, why don't you run your oxyhelium bottle dry while I carry this one? It'll save your strength. I'm all right. Well, you won't use air so fast with a lighter load. You have to have your arms free. Suppose you slip. Pee-wee, I won't carry it in my arms. My right-hand pack bottle is empty. I'll chuck it. Help me make the change, and I'll still be carrying only four, just balanced evenly. Sure, I'll help, but I'll carry two bottles. Honest, Kip, the weight isn't anything. But if I run the oxyhelium bottle dry, what would I breathe while you're giving me my next charge? I didn't want to tell her I had doubts about another charge, even in those ever smaller amounts. Okay, Pee-wee. She changed bottles for me. We threw the dead one down a black hole and went on. I don't know how far we climbed nor how long. I know that it seemed like days, though it couldn't have been, not on that much air. During mile after mile of trail, we climbed at least 8,000 feet. Heights are hard to guess, but I've seen mountains I knew the heights of. Look it up yourself, first range east of Tombaugh Station. There's a lot of climbing, even at 1/6 G. It seemed endless because I didn't know how far it was nor how long it had been. We both had watches under our suits. A helmet ought to have a built-in watch. I should have read Greenwich time from the face of the earth, but I had no experience, and most of the time I couldn't see Earth because we were deep in mountain. Anyhow, I didn't know what time it had been when we left the ship. Another thing spacesuits should have is rear view mirrors. While you're at it, add a window at the chin so you can see where you step. But of the two, I would take a rear view mirror. You can't glance behind you. You have to turn your entire body. Every few seconds, I wanted to see if they were following us, and I couldn't spare the effort. All that nightmare trek, I kept imagining them on my heels, expecting a wormy hand on my shoulder. I listened for footsteps, which couldn't be heard in vacuum anyhow. When you buy a spacesuit, make them equip it with a rear view mirror. You won't have worm face on your trail, but it's upsetting to have even your best friends sneak up behind you. Yes, and if you're coming to the moon, bring a sunshade. Oscar was doing his best, and York had done an honest job with the air conditioning, but the untempered sun is hotter than you would believe, and I didn't dare use air just for cooling any more than Pee-wee could. It got hot and stayed hot, and sweat ran down, and I itched all over and couldn't scratch, and sweat got into my eyes and burned. Pee-wee must have been parboiled. Even when the trail wound through deep gorges lighted only by reflection off the far wall, so dark that we turned on headlamps, I was still hot. And when we curved back into naked sunshine, it was almost unbearable. The temptation to kick the chin valve, let air pour in and cool me, was almost too much. The desire to be cool seemed more important than the need to breathe an hour hence. If I'd been alone, I might have done it and died. But Pee-wee was worse off than I was. If she could stand it, I had to. I'd wondered how we could be so lost so close to human habitation, and how crawly monsters could hide at a base only 40 miles from Tombaugh Station. Well, I had time to think and could figure it out because I could see the moon around me. Compared to the moon, the Arctic is swarming with people. The moon's area is about equal to Asia, with fewer people than Centerville. It might be a century before anyone explored the plain where Wormface was based. A rocket ship passing over wouldn't notice anything even if camouflage hadn't been used. A man in a spacesuit would never go there. A man in a crawler would find their base only by accident, even if he took the pass we were in and ranged around that plane. The lunar mapping satellite could photograph it and rephotograph it. Then a technician in London might note a tiny difference on two films. Maybe. Years later, somebody might check up if there wasn't something more urgent to do in a pioneer outpost where everything is new and urgent. As for radar sightings, there were more unexplained radar sightings before I was born. Wormface could sit there as close to Tombaugh Station as Dallas is to Fort Worth and not fret, smug as a snake under a house. Too many square miles, not enough people. Too incredibly many square miles. Our whole world was harsh, bright cliffs and dark shadows and black sky and endless putting one foot in front of the other. But eventually, we were going downhill oftener than up, and at weary last, we came to a turn where we could see out over a hot, bright plain. There were mountains awfully far away. Even from our height, up 1,000 feet or so, they were beyond the horizon. I looked out over that plain, too deadbeat to feel triumphant, then glanced at Earth and tried to estimate due west. Pee-wee touched her helmet to mine. There it is, Kip. Where? She pointed, and I caught a glint on a silvery dome. The mother thing trilled at my spine. What is it, children? Tombaugh Station, mother thing. Her answer was wordless assurance that we were good children and she had known we could do it. The station may have been 10 miles away. Distances were hard to judge, what with that funny horizon and never anything for comparison. I didn't even know how big the dome was. Pee-wee, do we dare use radio? She looked back. I did also. We were about as alone as could be. Let's risk it. What frequency? Same as before, space operations, I think. So I tried. Tombaugh Station. Come in, Tombaugh Station. Do you read me? Then Pee-wee tried. I listened up and down the band I was equipped for. No luck. I shifted to horn antenna, aiming at the glint of light. No answer. We're wasting time, Pee-wee. Let's start slogging. She turned slowly away. I could feel her disappointment. I had trembled with eagerness myself. I caught up with her and touched helmets. Don't let it throw you, Pee-wee. They can't listen all day for us to call. We see it, now we'll walk it. I know, she said dully. As we started down, we lost sight of Tombaugh Station, not only from twists and turns, but because we dropped it below the horizon. I kept calling as long as there seemed any hope, then shut it off to save the battery. We were about halfway down the outer slope when Pee-wee slowed and stopped, sank to the ground, and sat still. I hurried to her. Pee-wee! Kip, she said faintly, could you go get somebody, please? You know the way now. I'll wait here. Please, Kip? Pee-wee, I said sharply, get up. You've got to keep moving. I, I can't, she began to cry. I'm so thirsty. And my legs. Pee-wee, I shook her head. You can't quit now. Mother thing, you tell her, she trilled. Her eyelids fluttered. Keep telling her, mother thing. I flopped Pee-wee over and got to work. Hypoxia hits as fast as a jab on the button. I didn't need to see her blood color index to know it read danger. The gauges on her bottle told me. The oxygen bottle showed empty. The oxyhelium tank was practically so. I closed her exhaust valves, overrode her chin valve with the outside valve, and let what was left in the oxyhelium bottle flow into her suit. When it started to swell, I cut back the flow and barely cracked one exhaust valve. Not until then did I close stop valves and remove the empty bottle. I found myself balked by a ridiculous thing. Pee-wee had tied me too well. I couldn't reach the knot. I could feel it with my left hand, but I couldn't get my right hand around. The bottle on my front was in the way, and I couldn't work the knot loose with one hand. I made myself stop panicking. My knife, of course, my knife. It was an old scout knife with a loop to hang it from a belt, which is where it was. But the map hooks on Oscar's belt were large for it, and I had to force it on. I twisted it until the loop broke. Then I couldn't get the little blade open. Spacesuit gauntlets don't have thumbnails. I said to myself, Kip, quit running in circles. This is easy. All you have to do is open a knife, and you've got to, because Pee-wee is suffocating. I looked around for a sliver of rock, anything that could pinch hit for a thumbnail. Then I checked my belt. The prospector's hammer did it. The chisel end of the head was sharp enough to open the blade. I cut the clothesline away. And we'll find out how we get on from here next time.